Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today, Allyson, I actually found my sign I put up because you talked about how you were teaching people how to thrive. So I put the sign up that says, don't just survive, thrive. So Allyson,
Yay.
Welcome to the show. And tell us, before we get into all your stuff, tell us exactly what you do.
I am the founder of Unapologetic Power, and I teach people to become the boss of their brain by understanding that we are not our mind. We are a person with a mind, and we get to choose our thoughts and learn how to self-regulate so that we're not emotionally reactive 24/7.
So how did you come about this? Because your story, when I was reading your little bio that you sent me, your story is one of really overcoming a lot and thriving instead of just, getting in the being disappointed and depressed and not moving forward.
Yeah, so I was pregnant and homeless and living in my car when I was 19, and going through that experience and understanding that my life could have gone in several different directions. And despite my circumstances, I kept trying to choose the higher plan for my life, but I was doing it from a survival standpoint and not one of really thriving. Mm-hmm. And in my 30s, I was super successful. I was selling real estate. I was helping battered women in a shelter. I was a single mom. I was doing all these things. And my friend and I started running and going to the gym together. And so we hired a personal trainer. And every time I would go to the gym, he would be like, your pulse is really high. It's too high for your age. It would be 112 when I would get there. And so he's like, I want you to start counting your pulse. I want you to just figure out where it is when you wake up in the morning. And I would wake up and it would be 89, 97. So he was like, you need to go to your physician and have a full physical before I can continue working out with you. And all of my blood work, everything came back fantastic. And my physician was like, Allyson, you're stressed. And I was like, I am not stressed. I have a beautiful house. I just bought a brand new car. My daughter's everything's great. It's wonderful, blah, 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 blah. And he was just like, it's not the outside that your life is the measure of your life. It's how you feel while you're living. And that just really hit home with me. And that is when I started to, I got back into therapy and I started to just understand that I was white knuckling through my life and it was miserable.
So let's start at the beginning. You said you were homeless and pregnant at 19. How did that happen? How did you manage to overcome that to get to where you are?
So I was engaged to be married and I failed a pregnancy test. And I went to my fiance and initially he was over the moon and we were super excited. And then when he told his parents, they had a very different feeling about it. And I just want to tell your audience, I believe that women have the choice over their body. Mm-hmm. So this is not don't have an abortion story, because that is not this. Yeah. So, I went to an abortion clinic because that is what my fiance's parents wanted me to do. And I was on the table and I couldn't go through with it because we had conceived a child through love. And we were our life plan was to get married and have kids. And so just because it wasn't in the order that his parents wanted it to be, to me, it didn't mean that it was wrong.
Yeah.
So I walked out of the clinic. I went home. I lied to my fiance, which was not cool. And then, of course, a couple of weeks later, morning sickness kicked in and I'm vomiting, and he figured everything out. And I think if I hadn't lied to him, we probably would have been able to get through it together. But he, as he should have, he lost complete trust in me. And so he and his father, while I was at college, on my campus going to school, they changed the locks on the house that my fiance and I were living in. And so when I came home, I couldn't get into the house. And I grew up in a very dysfunctional, abusive household. We were slapped, pinched, hit. Our basic needs weren't met. Like there was no food in the refrigerator, all the things. And so the only person that I had to turn to was my abuser, my mom. And so I called her and told her that the engagement was off. And I remember her saying, of course it is. Like, who would marry me, kind of thing. And so when I went back to live with her, it was maybe a week to 10 days later, she figured out that I was throwing up every morning. And then she realized that I was pregnant. And then she also wanted me to have an abortion, which I refused to do. And so I got home from school one night and she had also changed the locks. Yeah. Yeah. So that happened to me in a span of 40 days. And I just sat in my car and I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like I was just, and I had a little rusted out 1978 Volkswagen Beetle. And I was just sitting in that car, like screaming at the universe, basically just saying, if you want me to go get an abortion, I'll go get an. I mean, I just didn't know. I didn't know what to do. And what I heard was a voice. And it just said, go back to school, park in the garage and go to sleep. And I don't really know that I slept that night, but I went back to the parking garage and it was freezing cold outside. So I went into the very bottom of the parking garage over into like a little corner. And that is where my car stayed. And I ran out of gas, trying to stay warm in my car. And I only had 10 more meals left on my lunch plan at school. It was just a lot of things happening. And thankfully, a professor kind of noticed that I had the same clothes on every single day and that they weren't clean because, I didn't have any way to wash my clothes. And so he and his wife rescued me out of my car. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But I lived in my car for 3 weeks before that happened.
At what point did I know you probably think I hit rock bottom. Was there any point where you were like, I just can't go on? Or was that in your mindset, I have to go on. I have to do this. I have to do this. What got you through those times?
That's such an interesting question because the very last night that I was in the car, it was to date the coldest night on record in Atlanta, Georgia.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't know that there were all these, I knew that there were some warnings, but I didn't know that you could actually like freeze to death inside of your car. But I literally was, I was freezing and I just thought, if I go to sleep, I'm going to die. And I'm okay with that. I was just done. I really was. And then there was a knock on my car window and it was my professor. And he was just like, my wife made me come and get you because I told her that I believed that you were down here living in your car. And he's like, you need to follow me. And I was like, I can't, I don't have any gas in my car. And he was like, well, you're going to come to our house and It's not, a permanent solution, but you're going to freeze to death if you stay here. And just that little bit of kindness, it's amazing what just a tiny little raindrop of kindness will do to someone's emotional state of being.
So true. I mean, so at that point, you are okay. You're with your professor. You've gone through this. Now, how did you get to the point where you were able to get through school? Because obviously, school cost you some money, and you were living on your car at this point. How were you able to survive to get to where you are now today?
Well, I did have to step away from school because I knew very quickly after. So I spent 3 days with my professor, and then he put me in touch with an adoption agency, and then they kind of picked up my life from there. So I knew that I was going to be placing my son for adoption, and that takes a huge toll on a person. I mean, it's really. There are no words to describe that feeling. There's just no words to describe it. And so I was in a place in my life where I was mature enough to understand that I needed to drop something. And the logical thing was to drop school. I did go back, of course, but I really had to just focus on myself and my own well-being to make it through that horrific ordeal.
Now, with the people, the clients that you work with now, do you ever share that story and tell them, hey, this is where I was, and now this is where I am now. You can do it too. What are the reactions to your story?
Yeah, I actually wrote a book. Your listeners can find it on Amazon if they want to. It's called The Spiritual Journey, the part no one talks about. And my clients, when they first hear the story, they're just like, how can you have this life that you have now? Right? And that's what everybody wants to know. It's like, how can you have this life that you have now? And the thing that I came to realize when I was pregnant with my son, 3 things. Number one is, and this is not about religion, but we all really do have an invisible team on the other side. You can call it God, you can call it your ancestors, you can call it energy, and connecting to that power on the other side helped me keep my sanity, because I am clairaudient, and so I was just constantly hearing, and we're all clairaudient. I just have to say this. I don't believe that there are people with gifts and people that don't have. We all have them. It's just a matter of tapping into them. So I was just hearing those little voices. The second thing was that I learned to trust my intuition, and that not only trusting it, but following its guidance, even when it made absolutely no sense. Like going back to that parking garage and parking and living in my car, it made no sense. But God saw that it was really my safest road. It was my safest path at that moment. Because I was really kind of hidden behind like this concrete pillar, and it was really kind of hard to find my car. So it was like a little fortress, for myself. And then the third thing is understanding that we make a choice in every second of every single day to either be or disempowered. And I just was tired of being a victim. I just was tired of it. And I'm tired of people treating me like a victim too. That because the adoption agency was treating me like a victim. The hospital where I delivered my son, they were treating me like a victim. My family was treating me like a victim. And when people treat us like a victim, they take our power away from us, and we are giving our power to them. So I didn't like that feeling. And so I just started asking myself some really tough questions, like, who do I need to step away from in order to be able to stand in my power? And some of the people that I had to step away from, it was painful, but necessary, and then who do I need to align myself with? People that are going to challenge me to stay in my power and stand in my power and fight for myself. And it was extremely uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable. Because, your brain wants you to go back to being that victim. It wants you to, you can't figure anything out. You don't know how. It's too hard, and just lay down and not fight for yourself. But it's not going to get you anywhere.
That is so true. We need to take a brief commercial break. We'll be right back talking about some of the things how you were able to stand in your power. So we'll be right back.
People welcomed me, and they knew the pain of the journey that we'd been on because they'd been there too.
Other Parents Like Me is an online community, peer-led, for parents with kids struggling with mental health and or substances.
It's a space that's safe. Feels like I can actually share what's going on.
We offer 15 daily support groups per week and live speaker talks on Thursdays, as well as a monthly expert panel.
We also have a resource hub that has a toolkit. This includes over 1,000 articles, podcasts. There's a glossary with the most recent and relevant terms. And we have a directory that's been vetted.
The overwhelming feeling when we're sitting in a meeting and I'm telling my story and I see others shaking their head, tears falling. They understand this roller coaster and they're along for the ride.
And we are back chatting with Allyson. We were talking about, before we went to the break, about standing in your power. How did you go about gaining your power and making sure that nobody took that power away from you?
The first thing was aligning myself with a therapist who very lovingly would kind of suck it to me when I was slipping down into that victim mentality. She was a cognitive behavioral therapist. And so, cognitive behavior is there's an outside circumstance, and then we have all of these thoughts about it that cause feelings, which cause us to behave the way that we do, which gives us a result that we want. So every time that I wasn't getting a result that I wanted, and I would go to therapy and talk to her about it, she would just throw it at me. What are you thinking? What are you thinking? Because what you're thinking, Allyson, is that you're powerless. That's what you're thinking right now. And she just kept drilling that into my head week after week after week in therapy. And finally, like, this just switch turned on inside of me at the age of 23. And I was like, I get this. Like, I finally really get this and understand it. Does it mean that life is perfect after that? Absolutely not. Does it mean that I've never slipped back into being a victim? Absolutely not. But it gave me a very solid foundation of, when I do slip back, the fall down that mountain is much shorter than it would be had I not met her and gone through that experience.
So how do you catch yourself when you're falling back into that victim mentality? What do you do to say, okay, no, this is a victim mentality. I need to get out of that. So how do you kind of make yourself get out of it?
The very first thing that I do is I look at the results that I'm getting. And I love sharing this from just like a very easy standpoint, right? So let's say that you make a decision that you're going to walk 10 minutes every day. And then a week goes by and you haven't walked at all.
Yeah.
So a victim says, well, it was the weather. I need a new pair of tennis shoes. I don't like the way my neighbor looks at me when I walk past his house. There's a scary dog at the end of the street. Like, I don't want to go that way. Like, all of those things. And they're excuses, but when we're in a victim mentality, they feel like valid reasons, right? And so what I do is I look at Did I walk this week? No. Okay, what are the reasons that I didn't walk? And I will write them all down. And then I will look at the reasons and say, is that true? And that is what snaps me. Like, I will get snapped out of it so fast because I'm like, well, I can walk in a different direction. Or, you don't have to wear tennis shoes to walk. You can wear, your clocks or, whatever is going on. So that it not only works for me, but I teach this and I know that it works for other people. So anyone that's listening to this, if you're like, I'm stuck, I would really highly suggest that happening.
I love that. It sounds so simple, but yet so many people don't want to do that. They don't want to question it. They just want to stay in that victim mentality. What made you, besides working with the therapist, made you say, okay, I don't want to be a victim anymore. I want to help other people not to be victims anymore as well.
I wanted a better life. I was tired of waking up every day and saying a cuss word out of my mouth. I used to wake up every day and cuss and drag myself out of bed. And, some days I would brush my teeth. Some days I wouldn't, I went to the same gas station, got the same cup of coffee, drove the same way to school, the same way to work, the same way to the shelter. And I hated the way that I felt. And, there was a part of me that's like, well, at least I'm not in a battered relationship. And I would always compare myself to people that were in way worse situations than me and say, my life is, at least it's not that. At least I don't have cancer. At least I'm not missing a leg, at least I'm not blind. Like, I would go to these, to those kind of places. And one day I don't know. I was sitting at my apartment complex next, at my pool, and I realized that I didn't want to be sitting there. I didn't want to have the life that I was living, and I realized that I was really burned out working with battered women. And I was killing myself trying to get a master's degree, and I was killing myself trying to do all these things. And so I just quit everything. I just quit.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was just like, I'm going to get my real estate license, and I'm going to I'm just going to start doing something completely different. My sister was selling real estate and she was killing it and doing really well. So I was just like, I'm going to step over and the selling real estate part, I wouldn't trade it for anything because I learned so much about business, but it still was not inspired action. I thought that real estate was going to save me. And then it wasn't until 2007 when I started volunteering again and just watching, or not again, for the first time, at a women's shelter again. And I was just like, yes, they need clothes and yes, they need jobs, but what they really need is to understand how powerful they are. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I just decided that I'm going to start teaching what I know.
Now let's start about the very first time that you taught. I know you, in your mind, the back of your mind, because you were coming out of your comfort zone a little bit to teach, especially everything that you learned. But how was that? How did people receive it? Were they like, oh my gosh, she's another one of these life coaches out there, another one of these transformational coaches. They're coming out of the wazoo. Does she really know what she's talking about? How did they react to when you said you were going to do this?
The women that preferred to stay in their victim mentality rolled their eyes and never came into the workshops. The other women were so thirsty for it that I couldn't show up enough. Like it was almost like a codependency thing where they were just like clinging to me. And that is when I decided that I didn't want to do it in that environment. I wanted to get out of that environment and really, because my ideal client now, like their life looks amazing on paper. Like they, on the outside, you look at their life and you're like, well, they have it all together, but they know they don't have it all together. Yeah. And they're, you know, not necessarily miserable on the inside, but they just can't get joyful. Like they've tried all the things. And so those clients, they love working with me because I've been in the trenches. You know, it's not that because, you know, placing my son for adoption is not the only trench that I've been in. You know, I lost everything in the real estate crash. I had to start all over again. And there's just, you know, several things like that. And I share my life very, very freely with my audience because I don't live on some magic pink cloud where, you know, everything is perfect all the time. But I am very disciplined and I do know how to turn your mindset around. And I'm finding that women and men, they're tired of their circumstances controlling their lives.
That is so true. I mean, a lot of people get so caught up in the circumstances of their lives that they don't see any other way out.
No, they don't. No. And, you know, like the people will say, oh, we're staying married for the kids. Well, that's like the worst. That's the worst reason to stay in a marriage. Or I'm staying in my job for my 401k. Well, that's a horrible reason too, you know. So we come up with these reasons that feel safe. They feel so safe, but they're not safe because we're not happy.
It's so true. Now, when you started this, you had to basically leave your comfort zone and go out on a limb. What was your very first thing that you said, okay, I have goals in mind. This is what I want to accomplish. What's the very first goal that you accomplished that you were like, I can do this?
The very first goal that I accomplished was holding a workshop in my living room. And I was sharing this story with someone the other day. So I handed out flyers like all over the places. You know, it's before people like really use social media to like advertise things. So I was taking flyers everywhere to bookstores and the library and all these places, and no one signed up. So I was upstairs in my bedroom with a pair of shorts on and a t-shirt, my hair up in a ponytail and no makeup on a Saturday morning at 9:30, and my doorbell rang. And I had forgotten that I put on the flyer that you could come without having to register.
Oh.
And so there were 2 women at my door for the workshop. And I was just like, ladies, I didn't think anyone was coming, but come on in, you know, and just getting paid and having them listen and get really into the workshop. And, you know, they shed a couple of tears when it was time for them to journal, like they were writing faster than the ink could go on the page and just saying like, this makes so much sense. I'm so glad that I came, you know, and I made $70. But when they left, I just sat down in my foyer and I just started crying because I'm like, there is something to this. Like, I need to be doing this. I just helped change their lives. Like, they are really, they get it. You know, they really did get it. And one of them is still my client to this day.
Wow.
And that was like 12 years ago, you know?
That was my question. How long ago was that? I mean, it must have made them feel good though, to see you come down with your shorts and t-shirt and ponytail, knowing that you're not going to put on any airs. Like, okay, I didn't think anybody was coming, but come on in. You're more than welcome to come in. We'll do this workshop, instead of saying, oh, well, come back another day when I'm really ready. Because I think being authentic and being like, hey, this is how I am right now, because I think anybody was going to show up. I think that probably endeared you more to them as well, because they're like, hey, she doesn't have it going on as much as we think a lot of people do, because a lot of people are so stuck on surface stuff that they don't get underneath.
Yeah, and I really do believe that that is probably one of the big keys to my success is that I am not performative. I just show up, Allison, and when we show up ourselves, it gives other people permission to show up as themselves. And when we show up as ourselves and we are not judged for it, and we are heard and we are seen, we don't have to agree, but just to look at someone and say, we are on different paths, but your path is just as important as my path. And just because you're on this path right now and you feel extremely disempowered does not mean that your path is wrong. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about understanding that we are all innately love and we are all innately powerful. And when we can just tap into that, just really tap into that, we want to do better for ourselves. We want to help other people. But when we are harshly judging ourselves and trying to figure out, are we good enough, not good enough? Am I on the right path? I get asked that question so many times and I always say, yes, yes, because every path is the right path. There are better paths than other paths, and better only in that, if you have a goal to play basketball and you're on a football path, then it's going to lead you to football. So yes, you have to get on a better path that leads you to basketball, but it doesn't mean that the football path is wrong.
No.
Yeah.
And I think you hit on the key point, not being judged, because I think so many people are so afraid of being judged that they don't share who they are authentically, because they're like, they're not going to like me, or oh my gosh, if I say this, and society has been so quick to judge people on just one little thing. It's awful.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting. And like it or not, COVID changed the face of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It really did. And so has social media. And some of those ways are amazing and wonderful ways that COVID has changed us and social media has changed us. And then there are other ways that feed into the internal frenzy.
Mm-hmm. So how do we get over that fear and being able to share ourselves and to open ourselves up to new experience without being judged? How do we get over that?
You don't get over it.
Okay.
I'm just going to say, I'm still afraid of being judged. I had a situation yesterday that I walked into, and before I walked into it, I was like, I'm going to get really, really judged. I'm going to be judged when I walk in this room right now. So what I did was I said, I'm going to be judged, and that's not about me. It's not about me. That is where they are coming from. Mm-hmm. So because I find in self-work, a lot of people want to get over. They want the fear to stop. Mm-hmm. It never stops. It just doesn't. And so you have to approach it like your teeth. There's food in my teeth. Mm-hmm. So what do I want to do? I'm going to floss my teeth, and it's just very matter of fact. So it's learning to breathe, to understand that the fear is usually not what we think it is, that we can control whether or not we feel afraid or not. And a lot of times I'll have people say, that's not true, but it is true. If you think about, a disaster that happens, like, I hate to use the example, but it's one that everybody remembers and they know exactly where it was when everything went down, but 9/11, right? Mm-hmm. There were some people who ran toward the buildings because they wanted to help people that were in the buildings. And there were other people who ran away from the buildings because they didn't want to get hurt. Neither one is wrong, but we don't just have one response to fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's learning how you personally respond to fear. How does Melissa respond to fear? Where do you feel that in your body? And then calming yourself down and looking for evidence that you're safe, because you are. We're always all safe, unless, something really honestly is happening. But walking into a room where you're going to be judged, you're still safe.
That is so true. So you just said that we never get over that fear, but in our mindset, like you said, we can change that around. So when people come to you and they start working with you, what's the very first thing that most of the time that you hit up against a wall that it takes a while for your clients to like break through and get it? Is it the fear of being judged, or is it something else?
It's wanting other people to change so that they'll be happy. That is the common denominator.
It's like, it's your fault, not my fault. It's their fault that I'm this way. It's not my fault that I'm this way.
Yeah. They'll come to me and say, Allyson, I need a mindset shift. And I'm like, great, wonderful. But then as a week or two will go on, they're like, my sister's really mean to me. If she would just change, then I probably wouldn't even need to be working with you. Or my partner, my spouse is like, they say this and they do this. And so my life is miserable. And I'm like, that's not why your life is miserable. Your life is miserable because of how you're showing up to the party. And it's so completely freeing when people start to understand that they don't have to participate in other people's pain.
That is so true. Now, how do we step away from trying to participate in other people's pain, or what other people think we should do when we really know we shouldn't be doing this?
Boundaries. So let's say that you and I are roommates, and I walk into the kitchen, and maybe I forgot to put my dishes away. And you're like, you always forget to put your dishes away. Like every single time I come into the kitchen, your dishes are always in the sink. Like, I can't believe blah, 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 blah. And you're just like really giving it to me. A very healthy boundary would be for me to say, Melissa, I let you down, and I'm really sorry for that. And I apologize that I left my dishes in the sink. But I'm not going to stand here and get berated for all of my past mistakes. So if you want to talk about the mistake I just made, like right now in the present, then let's do it. But I'm not going to talk about 2 weeks ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. Like that's 97% of arguments. As soon as someone says what's happening with them right now, they immediately go to, and you also did this, and you also did this. And they're going through the laundry list of all of their pain and their hurt. So a major boundary to build a healthy relationship is to establish that you are not available for the laundry list. And what it does over time is that if you're also a laundry lister, it makes you start to also look at yourself and be like, well, I actually do this to Melissa. Yuck. Like, I don't want to do that to Melissa. That's really gross, And so then I might come to your bedroom and knock on the door and say, Melissa, and it's called proactive apologizing. It's where I'm like, remember that dish thing that happened in the kitchen the other day? And you're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I just realized that I've done the same thing to you. Like, I'm so sorry. And what starts to happen is that instead of division, unity is built. And that's where relationships start to repair, is when people start owning their stuff.
And yeah, that is so hard. It's hard to be the person that owns the stuff. And it's also hard to be the person on the other end of it that, they're saying, oh, wait a second, they're owning their stuff, then maybe I need to own mine. But then we also talk about the fear of judgment that comes back into play. And that's when we have to be kind of brave and step out and say, hey, look, I'm going to own my stuff, regardless of whether or not you own it or not. But I know in my mind and in what I'm doing, it's right for me. It may not be right for you to own it.
Right. Exactly. Yes. And also like lovingly inviting people to the table. I've taught a lot of my clients who are in relationships and not just romantic, but work relationships and family and friends. It's just to be like, listen, I'm doing this mindset work on myself right now. And it doesn't make me any better or worse than you. I'm just letting you know that I'm doing this mindset work. And so my language is going to change. I'm learning a new language. And so what I'm asking is that you just be patient with our relationship while I'm going through this transition right now. And what it does is that it takes the other person off guard. Because they're like, oh, you're changing. You're not expecting me to change. You're learning the new language. You're not asking me to learn the new language. You're just asking me to be patient while you go through all of these changes. But ultimately what will happen is that because we're inviting someone to the table and we're not giving them any kind of ultimatums or doing anything else, they will either leave or get on board. And you have to be okay with either one. Right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's like mind blowing because, yeah, you're right. Leave or get on board. I mean, what happens to the people? Have you ever had someone that changed their mindset and changed the way they worded things to say, okay, my partner or my best friend just decided they didn't want to be friends with me anymore because they didn't like my mind shift change?
Yes. Yes. It actually happens quite a bit, and a couple of weeks ago, one of my clients said kind of a very unkind thing to me, but they said, I'm going to start calling you the divorce manifester because it seems like, people that you work with, they get divorced. And I'm like, and a lot more people that I work with don't get divorced.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're in a broken relationship, mindset work may fix it and it may not, but that, I would encourage anyone who's listening, don't get into therapy or get into mindset work to save your marriage. You do those things to save yourself. Do it for you. And if the marriage survives, then that's even better. That's fantastic. And if it doesn't, then that's okay too. Because a lot of people, or your family even, a lot of people are in dead relationships anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just staying because it feels safe. And safety is not always the way to go.
So true. And I always have a quote, and I think I have it somewhere around here. Life begins once you step outside your comfort zone. And I think that's important to know.
That is huge, and that is true, and it's everything.
Our time is almost up, Allyson. And before we talk about where people can find you and how people can work with you, is there one last little nugget that you want to share with us?
The last nugget that I really think would be helpful is to learn to breathe. I know that sounds crazy, but a study was done by Harvard recently that showed that we walk around panting or holding our breath, that people are not breathing life into themselves. They are surviving. And so one of the tools that I've learned, and I really impart it on everyone, is to take just 5 minutes out of like your day and just sit it wherever you are, your car, your office, wherever, and just breathe. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it probably would help too. If you're in a panic situation, just take that to breathe and have that few minutes to where you're like, okay, I need to center myself back into my way of thinking and not the way everybody else wants me to think.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how can people work with you?
You can go to AllysonRoberts.com, and you can reach out to me through there. Or you can find me on Facebook at Outrageous Results. That's the group. It's a public group. And well, it's a public group, but you have to be, invited into it, or your invitation has to be accepted. You can send me a message on Facebook that way. That's how most people reach out to me, is through Facebook. And we'll get the party started.
I love how you said, we'll get the party started. I love that. I like that, the way, because a lot of people, when they think they're going into something and they're going to make a change, whether it's in their mindset or anything else, that they feel like they're going to lose something. But I like the way you phrased it. We'll get the party started. So people are gaining something instead of feeling like they're going to lose stuff.
The only thing you're going to lose is a part of yourself that's not working anymore.
I love that. So, Allyson, I want to thank you for coming on and for sharing about how important mindset is, how how you overcame everything so you could not just survive, but thrive. And I love the fact that you showed up that very first time that you had that workshop. You didn't think anybody was coming, and 2 people showed up, totally shocked you, but you still continued on, which I think a lot of people need to let go of the way things appear and just be their authentic self.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Melissa, for having me and for allowing me to share my heart with you.
And thank you so much for sharing your heart and for sharing your story. You have a lot of courage, even before you started this mindset work. Is at 19 years old, living homeless in your car, pregnant, and then giving your son up for going through adoption and things like that. That's something that a lot of 19-year-olds are dealing with now. A lot of people are dealing with now. Either homeless, living in a car, not really knowing where to turn, and you turned it into making a career for yourself in the mindset, how you changed everything.
Yeah, I feel really blessed. I really do.
So, guys, I will put in the show notes everywhere you can find Allyson, as well as where you can also find her book that she talked about. I will go ahead and link it on the Amazon link as well. And Allyson, once again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
So until next time, keep chatting. Bye.